Hi everyone, welcome to a Download Youth Ministry youth worker training. As a youth pastor myself, I'm hanging out in my office today. It brings me great joy to know that there's men and women who are willing to take time out of their week to deepen their understanding of youth ministry and sharpen their skills. So first, let me say thank you. And it's my prayer that this time will be valuable to you and your team. Now, too often, youth workers are stereotyped. Now, you know the drill, right? The perception is that in order to be a good youth worker, you have to be young, cool, and have lots of free time. The stereotypical youth worker, right? They've got to be culturally relevant, know the latest songs on iTunes, and be able to name the stars in the newest blockbuster movies. Well, today, I want to shatter that unrealistic stereotype and talk about what it really takes to be an effective youth worker. Now, I'm going to divide this training into 3 kind of shorter sessions and ask you to pause the video in order that you can maybe give you some time to reflect on your own youth ministry experience, your teenage years, or give you some time to dialogue this if you're watching with a team. So join me as we jump into a youth ministry time machine. Now, let's go back in time to when you were a teenager. Now, let's get in touch with the culture that you grew up in. Now, today's teenager listens to music maybe on their phone. How about you? When you were a teen, maybe that was a couple years ago or more than a couple years ago. What did you listen to music on? Was your style of music? Who were the bands and who were you into? All right, let's talk about movies for a second. What was the big blockbuster of the year when you were 15, right? Now, I'm in my 40s now. So Return of the Jedi, the last of the original Star Wars trilogy, the only ones that matter, those were the big ones for me. Now, life-changing, right? And in a weird twist of fate, some of those old movies, they're even making comebacks these days, especially my favorite and God's favorite, Star Wars, right? What's old eventually becomes new, and Hollywood sure does love sequels. So think about the movies and the music when you were a teenager. How about fashion? What did people wear on their feet when you were a teenager? What shoes were cool then? What hairstyles were popular when you were in junior high? Please don't say mullet. Please don't. Now, maybe you had a particularly fantastic bowl cut, or you sported that feathered hair that make you look like a young magician. Hey, now why do we do this? Well, it's because as we get in touch with our own teenage experience, I believe that's going to help make you a better youth worker. It's going to make you more sensitive to what the kids in your youth ministry are experiencing. Part of good youth ministry is just being aware of what teenagers are experiencing and what they think is important. So hit pause for a second and let's take a little time to reflect. Maybe you'll share with others the music, movies, or fashion that you experienced during your teenage years. I'll wait, and maybe I'll Google what George Lucas is up to these days here. Go ahead, do your thing, all right? All right, I hope that was more fun than depressing. So let's move into a little deeper place and see where that takes us. Now, you've dived deep into your past. You've talked about movies, music, and fashion. Let's try this one on. What types of experiences defined you during this period of your life? Were there any big experiences that helped shape who you are today? Maybe you experienced a divorce in your family. Or maybe it's the first time that you stood face to face with someone passing away. Maybe you were painfully bullied or picked on or had no friends at all. For many teenagers, adolescence involves critical development years because they include some very painful or traumatic experiences. For me, my high school experience was marked by 2 really significant things. The first was that my mom was diagnosed with a terminal illness. Talk about rocking a freshman student's world. And then related to that, the second thing is that we moved that same year from Texas to, wait for it, not California, not Florida. We moved to Wyoming. If you're from Wyoming, I'm sorry. I'm sorry for offending you. But to a ninth grade boy, talk about culture shock. Talk about a painful experience. Now, those moments, including new schools, new friends, the challenge of the first thoughts of a life without my mother, needless to say, those moments defined me. They shaped my view of God, my view of the church, family, and everything. Well, how about you? While it may not be quite as dramatic or life altering as all of that, certainly there were circumstances or changes in your life that really hit you hard during your teenage years. You may have spent years trying to figure out those memories or get them out of your mind, and now I'm asking you to bring them back up, and I'm sorry for that, but I promise you, remembering the difficult parts of your teenage years, they're going to help you be a better and more empathetic youth worker. So maybe spend some time reflecting, journaling, or sharing what that experience was like for you. All right? All right, good. Well, go ahead, hit pause. You know how this works. Here we go. All right, movies, music, fashion, circumstances. The last area I'd like you to take a look at as we journey down our personal memory lane together is to think about the people who were important to you during your teenage years. Who was your best friend? Who did you have a crush on? Who made the biggest impact in your life? I'd love for you to go beyond like the simple list of names, like, oh, that's easy, Josh. My friends were Jim, Dan, Jerry, and Carol. I want you to think about why they were important to you. What was it about them that made them so significant? How did they shape you, and where did they show up, and just why were they so important to you as a teenager? I think these questions could lead to a really interesting conversation, or at least something important to reflect on. So let's take a little extra time thinking about the people in our teenage years before I ask you to play the conclusion of this lesson. Where was I? All right, let's bring a little closure to memory lane. Now, hopefully you've laughed about 8-track tapes, or you've mocked each other's terrible haircuts, and you've admitted that maybe you still enjoy the music of the era that you grew up in. Did anybody say Elvis? Anybody? Well, we've reflected on some of the emotions, some of the pains, and some of the memories of the past too. And we've also talked about some of the key figures in your story. What I want to do now is just pull it all together and leave you with this simple thought. Culture is constantly changing. There's new music from bands that you've never heard of, and your students are listening to stuff you're never going to listen to. And to be honest, I'd rather be stabbed with a fork than listen to some of the music that my students are into. That movies, they're bigger than ever. And how we watch them has gone through a radical change too, right? Like movie theaters to VHS tapes to laser discs to DVDs, and now we're streaming everything on Netflix, or maybe by the time you watch this, it's beamed into your brain. I don't know. Thankfully, fashion has changed. And if you got ribbed pretty hard during the fashion segment of this training, it may be a good time to update your wardrobe, right? Like, just think about it. If someone's elbowing you right now, take it as a little nudge from God's Spirit. And since I'm Mr. Fashion, I'll be happy to consult with you. Well, here's the deal. Culture is constantly changing. You can't stop it. The teenage years are a crazy season of ups and downs, and just when students think they've figured it out, the ups get higher and the downs get lower. But it's not a culture that redirects a teenager's life. It's the people. It's you who make all the difference in a young person's life. Culture only wins when you're not involved. People are what matter most in the life of a teenager. And normal people, not the cool, stereotypical youth worker. It's normal people like you and me. Yeah, a lot has changed over time. But what hasn't changed is that teenagers still want to be known, loved, and cared for. And that's where you come in. You may have terrible fashion, but you know your students' names. You may not know the latest indie bands or even the top 10 songs on Spotify. You might not even know what Spotify is. So you're like, hey, what's Spotify? Hey, it's okay. You love the teenagers in your small group. You get to be one of those voices that years from now, that squirrely teenager who sometimes can be such a tool, they're going to whisper your name when they reflect on the question of who influenced them most. Some of you, you're going to be way up there with the greats. They're going to go, oh, my mom and my dad, and then you. How amazing is that? It doesn't matter how old you are, how far removed from the culture you are, or your own teenage years are a distant memory. You have the privilege, the honor, and the weighty responsibility to love them and guide them right now. My hope and my prayer is that this exercise and our time together, it's been encouraging to you as you serve students faithfully. You might not hear this for years, so let me tell it to you one more time. Thank you for loving God and loving students. He's entrusted them to you, and you're making a world of difference in their life. I promise you that. Blessings to you as you serve Him and you serve them this week.